The movie opens up with Minty, a black slave on a southern plantation, laying down on a field having flashes of slavery images. Since a particular head injury she got from a beating by her slave owners, she has had numerous visions, flashes of the future, which she feels are messages from God. Just then, her husband, John Tubman, who is a free man, arrives to tell her good news. He meets her lying on the field as they caressed each other. He goes on to tell her that they have secured a letter from a lawyer proving that Harriet's mother was supposed to be freed, so this means her children are free as well. In the next scene, we could see a gathering of slaves engaged in a sermon with their reverend. After the sermon, John and Minty decide to approach Mr. Brodus, the owner of the plantation. They tell him that they want to start up a family with their unborn child born as a free man. They have also secured a letter from a lawyer to guarantee their freedom. Mr. Brodus laughs at first, then he tears the letter up and cruelly denies the request, saying Minty and her unborn children will continue to work for him forever. Minty is heartbroken and falls down to cry. She prays to God for Mr. Brodus to die for what he's doing. Just then his son, Gideon, who grew up with Minty, hears her praying. He tells her that God doesn't answer black people's prayers. He continues by saying her prayer makes his skin crawl and he's tired of hearing them. Gideon also her to prove that she will be his slave now and forever. The next morning, it is reported that Mr. Brodus, the owner of the plantation, is dead. Minty is worried because she knows she will be in trouble and Gideon isn't going to take it lightly with her. Just as she predicted, Gideon puts up a poster of Minty, signifying that she is for sale. He decides he's going to sell Minty downriver, where she will never see her family or husband again. Just as she was doing her labor, she sees a man who had come to take her downriver. She runs away and meets up with her husband, John. She tells him that she had decided to run away and flee to the north. John insists on going with her, knowing if he is caught assisting her he will lose his freedom. He was ready to risk it all. They had agreed to meet up at a location later that night. Minty manages to give a silent goodbye to her mother, writ from a distance. Later that night, while John was waiting for her, Gideon catches up with him, and when he discovers that Minty is missing, he asks her about her whereabouts but he denies knowing anything about her. A furious Gideon then gives him a hit on the head. Meanwhile, Minty goes to her father, Ben. He instructs her to meet Reverend Green at the church. When she meets up with the Reverend, he warns her that she won't make it alone, and even if she doesn't get caught, wild animals might do the job. But Minty had made up her mind not to go back to the plantation. Reverend Green gives her the direction she is to follow to make this journey. He tells her to follow the North Star and the sound of the river. He tells her when she completes her journey, she should meet up with a man called Thomas Miguel. Minty begins her journey, but the next morning, she finds out that Gideon had Burrow and his men and their wild dogs to catch her. So she begins running again, but this time, she is caught by Gideon and his men on a bridge. With nowhere to go, she contemplates jumping off the bridge into the flowing river. Seeing that he could lose his slave, he tells her he won't sell her anymore, and that she should just come back home to her people. But she tells him she'd rather live free or die, and then jumps off the bridge into the river. Gideon is furious and orders his men to find her body. Unluckily they didn't find her, so they believe she died. Minty regains consciousness and continues her journey. She survives and hides inside a carriage traveling all the way to the north. Although the driver noticed that she was in there all this while, he decided to let her go. Once she arrives she meets up with the blacksmith who directs her to where she will meet William Still, founder of the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society, who helps organize the Underground Railroad. She goes into the City of Freedom and is told to walk like she has the same rights like the whites. There she meets up with William Still. He is interested in her case because she traveled over 100 miles to freedom. He helps Minty get settled in her new life as a free woman. When Minty narrates her history to him and how she left her husband and mother at her master's plantation, she is advised to pick out a new name, Harriet, her mother's middle name, and Tubman, her husband's last name. He introduces her to Marie Buchanan, who owns and runs a house for the freed. Marie shows her around and gives her paying job, making her just like other freed people. Marie grows fond of Harriet and the two form a friendship. Marie tells her about some boatman that could send word to her husband that she made it. 1 year later, Harriet has sent word to her husband and family that she's alive, but has not heard anything back. She goes to meet Williams. She tells him that she needs to go back to get her husband, but he insists it's too dangerous and if she's caught she will be tortured. Rescuing slaves requires you being able to read. Harriet is frustrated and persists that she will go alone if Williams isn't willing to help her. She goes to meet Marie asking for help. She helps her by reaching her how to be composed as a free woman. She gives her a new dress and also a loaded gun for protection. She get prepared to return to the South using fake papers. Meanwhile, Gideon and his mother Eliza are in a state of disarray, with the plantation not making as much money as it should, and their late father owing debts that they can't repay. They've decided to sell several of Harriet's bothers to meet up with all the payments and get their lives back in order. Harriet finally makes it back to the South. She meets up with her husband John. After a brief moment of reconnecting, he tells her that when he thought she drowned, he remarried and is now expecting a child with his new wife Caroline. Harriet couldn't believe what she just heard. She is disgusted and betrayed because she couldn't live without him, and did everything possible to get back to him, but John points out that she's the one that left him and he waited for her that day. Devastated, Harriet begins crying. She wonders why God sent her back there she fell off. Just as she wakes up, she sees her father with a blindfold on. He doesn't want to see her, just so he can tell the truth that he didn't see anything, as he is known as an honest person. Her father tells her that her brothers are being sold and they need to flee north. He takes her to where Harriet's brothers hid. Just then she realizes this is why she came back, not for her husband, but to help her family. Harriet decides to help her brothers become free and lead them and some others back through the Underground Railroad. She wants to take her sister. Harriet's mother has been freed and is now staying with her father, but he says he won't leave while any of his children are still there. So he encourages Harriet to go and not worry about them. They head over to the church where they meet up with Reverend Green. He shows Harriet some other slaves who he wants to be freed also. Unfortunately, a young black man named Walter spots Harriet and her crew. The next day, Gideon and his mother figures out that 5 of their best slaves were missing. They are all enraged and threatens to sell off Rachel's newborn if she doesn't give them the accurate information on who led the runaways. Afraid that she may lose her child, she snitches on Harriet. Although Gideon doesn't believe that Minnie is alive, he heads out to assemble slave hunters. Walter reports back to Gideon about their whereabouts in exchange for money. He tells Gideon that he will also bring along Abraham, a violent man who, though black, is known for catching runaway slaves. He agrees and offers to pay $300 if they are able to catch Harriet and the rest of the slaves unharmed. Just as Harriet led the slaves through the forest, they track Harriet and her group. In the dead of night, they are headed towards the bridge, but Harriet has a vision of the men at the bridge, so instead she decides to take left and wades into the river. At first her crew thinks she's insane, and one of her brothers began to rebel against her plan, but when she's able to cross the river without drowning, they are amazed and followed suit, in awe. Walter witnessed this and decides to lie and not tell Gideon where they went. Gideon becomes angry and then knocks him out. Harriet successfully gets her group north, and brings them to Williams, who is in shock. She tells Marie about how her husband got another woman. But she is led by God's voice and he guides her through dreams and visions. Williams takes Harriet to their committee of Underground Railway slaves conductors, where he initiates her as conductor. Harriet becomes one of the most successful conductors on the Underground Railroad, going back and forth bringing multiple groups north. Gideon continued putting up posters of lost slaves, with higher rewards. After successfully rescuing numerous slaves, Harriet tells Williams that she is going back to rescue her sister who resides in the Baudress house. But he is against it as it is more dangerous, and everyone out there was looking for her. Harriet, willing to rescue her sister, heads back to the south. She meets up with Rachel, who refuses to leave the plantation, saying she can't leave her babies and run away. Harriet is sad but is then encountered by Walters, who is willing to join her in rescuing slaves as he knew every hideout in the South. Harriet receives word from her father that her sister has died, and is devastated. She tells William that they failed her. She meets other abolitionists and gives an impassioned speech on why they must keep fighting. Sometime later, the Fugitive Slave Act is enacted, which allows Southerners to come to the North and recapture slaves who are already free. William tries to get Harriet on the ship with all the freed slaves that is headed to Canada, but Harriet goes back to say goodbye to Marie, only to find Gideon and Abraham beating her for Harriet's location. Marie sees Harriet and notions for her to get out, saying her job is more important than all of them. They leave, but not before Abraham kills Marie, devastating Harriet. Harriet is living in Canada when she has a vision of her father in danger. She decides to once again go back to the South. She finds her father and tells him that he is about to be arrested for assisting slaves escaping, so he and Rit, who is shocked to see Harriet alive and well, decide to go. First, Harriet decides she must rescue her deceased sister's daughter, who is still living in the Baudress house. During the evening, Gideon and Eliza meet with angry debtors who say they are owed money, but Gideon and Eliza insist that it is all Moses' fault for stealing all their slaves. While they are out, Harriet enters their home, holds the children at gunpoint, and ties them up, allowing her to leave with her niece. Harriet has a group of slaves in addition to her family that she leads out of the South. Gideon and Abraham track them down, and Harriet has Walter continue to take them to freedom while she stays behind and lets them chase after her. Gideon demands Harriet be taken alive, but when Abraham angrily tries to shoot her, Gideon shoots him in the head. Harriet is able to get the drop on Gideon, shooting him in the hand. She has him on his knees at gunpoint, but rather than kill him, tells him he's going to die on the Civil War battlefield. She tells him God did not intend people to own people, and triumphantly steals his horse and rides off. 2 years into the Civil War, Harriet leads a raid that frees 750 slaves. She returns home to Canada where she lives with most of her family that she rescued, a free woman. The end. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe.